economy for scaling essentially between the two and all this kind of stuff. And I, there would still be, you know, there would still be guidance that would come to Riverview around like, you know, X dollars for development, X dollars for like in their books, and whatever people who want to use, you know, X amount of dollars for the rest of activity. But you, they are going to.
Denise, are you on mute?
Coordinators in the district so that
Okay, how is that? I'm hoping that that's better.
Yes.
I unmuted myself in the participant column, but maybe it didn't work. Are you all able to hear me now?
Just in the chat. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Hey, you know what? That's just like I normally feel when I'm just talking to myself in my car on the drive down to Little Rock. I'm coming to you this week from Little Rock. And for your sake, I will say, I'll probably go quickly through this. We're going to revisit some topics that are in need of revisiting. I'm not going to go through the PowerPoint in detail because the PowerPoint in detail is detailed the way it is so that you have it for reference. And I'll skim through some of the slides, but I'll draw your attention back using the survey. So I do have a survey for this week. It's going to ask you some questions from the prior two Zooms as well as today. And I would just say that your input has been so helpful in putting that survey together. So it's important that we continue to hear your input and the fact that you guys do such a great job of identifying the risks that are out there. What can we foresee because of what you know, because you're the ones who actually execute the work. I do want to focus on this for a second. How do we transition to a future vision? This is stealing a little bit of thunder from the Colorado plan that I saw. Actually, it was a year ago, February. They were messaging that they were going to be moving towards a very innovative approach to accountability. And what they were talking about in that was that innovative approach was really their version 3.0. It's like getting new software. Each time you change what you're doing, it's like getting an updated version that fixes bugs. I think from that analogy, we need to think about accountability. We've had the old accountability system. We've been in pauses of various sorts for the past year and a half. When we start back up again with annual meaningful differentiation of schools, we're really going to be in this transitional bubble, this opportunity zone where we're going to be creating that pathway to a future vision of this transparent, developmental type of support-focused accountability system. In the meantime, we do have to honor what we've learned through our work and also deal with the present realities of all the things we hope to do. What can we do right now? And what are the actions we need to take so we can move to where we want to be? I wanted to have that kind of mindset for you as we move into it. I've been refining this statement a little bit based on all the different input as the week goes by, but really it's about, we're trying to come up with this ESSA plan to provide a comprehensive support and accountability system that includes multiple measures that inform the improvement of student learning. And if the system can do that, then the State Department and LEAs will be able to identify and address the needs within their respective systems using this cycle of inquiry, integrating the information that comes from the system so that we are all informed at the state level, at your local level, at the school level, what we need to do strategically in the way of support, whether that's human or fiscal resources, so that you will increase student learning, which will also increase students' readiness for college, career, and community engagement. And ultimately, that should lead to closing achievement gaps within and across schools. So very quickly, revisiting long-term goals, interim progress measures, and identification of schools. I don't necessarily want to talk about exit criteria until the end because it's situated in this idea of long-term goals and measures of interim progress. What are the optimal performance standards for schools in terms of growth and achievement, in terms of graduation rate, in terms of English language acquisition progress, in terms of those fifth indicators? We're going to have to start somewhere, and last week you all shared that you want to start in reality. So I quickly ran just a comparison. These are the values for the percentage of students that are meeting or exceeding. So this is just achievement here. But this is our starting point when we put together ACT Aspire and MSAA. What percentage of our students, if I look at all schools, that's the column ELA achievement and the column math achievement, that's everybody. And then where it says Title I schools, I probably should have qualified this. I took 40% poverty and used that as a proxy. But if we were to situate things in reality, we might have a long-term goal of getting to the point where 80-85% of schools schools have 80 to 85% of their students achieving, but maybe 100% meeting growth. This kind of gives you a sense of the reality that we're starting with. And that's from that reality, we need to really look at ambitious and realistic long-term goals for all students and subgroups. Again, there are a lot of decisions we need to think about around this because this sets us up for everything else that's calculated off of the differentiation system. We could have long-term goals that are aspirational, and in the survey it'll talk a little bit more about that. They could be based on the outcomes of all schools. So one of the things that was recommended to us when we met with Juan DeBrat was, he said, really think about how your accountability system supports your long-term goals. What do you want most schools to look like? What would that performance profile look like for a school? What would achievement look like? What would growth look like? What would graduation rate, etc.? Maybe that's your aspirational long-term goal. And then from there, we turn around and we determine what interim progress toward that goal might look like. So I've got a few questions in here that are actually in the survey as well. When we start from the beginning, maybe we look at the 90th or 95th percentile of what Title I schools are doing. And we say, okay, what's a stretch goal? What can take our schools to the next level? And start there. And interim progress can be calculated in a variety of different ways. Some states are setting long-term goals as 10, 15, or 20 years from now. And what they're doing is they're then dividing up the time in between into, for example, equal sets of 5 years, and being very upfront about resetting interim progress every so many years, because they want it to be informed by the data that's collected on the system. So they want that information to inform where we go with that future accountability system. So what if long-term goals and interim progress were set in a way that's mindful of the average impact of evidence-based interventions? So if our long-term goal were that 80% of students were meeting or exceeding readiness, and 100% of students were meeting growth, and whatever that comes out to be on the total differentiation system, what if we think about what progress schools need to make in terms of the kinds of impacts that we know evidence-based interventions can have? I'm throwing this out here because I really thought Kentucky did this in one of their iterations of their accountability system, and it was actually quite brilliant. They basically said that if you're below a certain percentile in your starting baseline, then you're going to have to improve by a fraction of a standard deviation. And when we looked at what that would look like for Arkansas, given some of the gaps we have for some of our lowest performing schools, we might be talking about a third of a standard deviation, or 1/9 of a standard deviation, which is actually about 1 to 2 percentage points increase per year. And if you think about that as ambitious, but also realistic, it's actually a really good place for most schools to be in. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and as you're listening to me talk about this, do others out there have any thoughts about setting interim progress? Know that we don't even have to, there is no requirement that we communicate our long-term goals or our interim measures, our interim progress measures, in numeric terms. There's actually a prohibition against the Secretary of Education requiring that. So just thoughts from you. I'll pause for a minute and do my practicing of wait time.
Denise, would this be like the old AMOs? Cannot hear me.
I've just unmuted everybody in case anybody wants to talk. I can mute you all again in just a minute. Any thoughts about long-term goals and setting interim progress measures?
Can you hear me?
All right. I don't know if I've improved my wait time since the first Zoom. You all have to tell me that. But we might come back to this question. Okay. A related question is gap closure. And this becomes interesting in light of the repeal of the regulations really changes how we can think about identifying schools that have consistently underperforming subgroups. However, we're morally and ethically bound to closing the achievement gap. Can we use baseline statistics for the indicators? Use the Title I schools that have a certain percentage of students who are at risk because of economic factors, one of the biggest commonalities we have across the state of Arkansas. Can we use that to kind of help us understand what might be appropriate long-term goals and interim progress for gap closure? In doing that, we really need to think about what are gap sizes that are unacceptable, and what does realistic gap closure look like, and how do we set expectations for that for different groups, knowing that different groups have different challenges that are the reason that they're their own subgroup. So should gap closure focus on meeting progress targets as it was in the prior accountability system, or some form like that? Should it be index-based? Focusing on taking the entire index, for example, calculating achievement, growth, graduation rate, and the fourth and fifth indicators, and looking at how that subgroup score compares to the all student score, and identifying whether or not there's a gap there. Because I would imagine we all fear the gap in achievement, but if we then put into play growth and other factors that we think are part of a quality school or student success, maybe those gaps aren't as large. So is that something we might want to look at for gap closure? And again, if we're doing that, then growth can play as large of a role as we give it in the decided weights. And then maybe we want a combination where it's interim progress towards targets. I will tell you that when we spoke with Wanda Broad at the Center for Assessment, when it came to exit criteria, we talked about how our old exit criteria were tied to schools meeting targets. And he said, I absolutely recommend that you not do that in the future now that you don't have to, because it doesn't take into account some of the full pieces and because of all the classification error that can happen along the way. So that was a really interesting piece of information to get from experts from that center. So be thinking about this because there's a survey question around this. What are your thoughts in terms of gap closure? I would really love to hear from you all on this because this is information that we really need to be able to take back. Maybe you can help generate more thinking on this. What are your thoughts on gap closure? All right, I've unmuted you all. Everybody's so quiet today.
I wonder if you can't hear me or anybody else.
What are your thoughts on gap closure? Would you rather it be based on individual targets for different areas, or would you rather it bring together information or some combination thereof? We have a very quiet group today.
Yes, we do.
It's a Monday. Oh, okay. We're going to blame it on the time change, unless Danielle, you really want to speak up.
Denise?
I think there should be a combination for gap closure. I certainly don't think that.
Oh, I can't. If you're talking, I can't hear you. I can see that your microphone has a little bit of movement in it, but I can't hear you.
Sorry. You got some feedback.
She says a combination.
I agree.
Some people are talking, you can't hear them. Yeah. Oh. Okay, so we're finding out that some of you are trying to talk and we can't hear you. And I don't know what the... Oh, I'll take a look at the chat. Thank you. What would I do if I were all by my... what have we got in the chat, Tina?
Ask Cheryl to speak again and then Danielle.
Okay, so Cheryl and Danielle, unmute yourselves and speak again, and we'll see if we can hear you across the group.
This is Cheryl. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I was just going to say, as a provider who works with schools, whatever we do has to be crystal clear because in working, I think one of the previous questions was, is this going to be similar to AMOs? The AMOs were so left up to interpretation, and a lot of practices went on that probably weren't productive towards closing that achievement gap. So I just wanted to say, whatever we do, I think we need to be crystal clear about how to attain that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Danielle, I'm so sorry we couldn't hear you before. Go ahead.
No problem. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that I think that we would prefer a combination and not just an interim progress target because throughout this entire piece, I keep going back to looking at the entire picture, and I don't want, an interim progress that might be difficult for students to reach because of certain circumstances or whatever the situation might be, that paints a certain picture for the students and for the school. And so I would say a combination of indicators for us.
Right, because if there's a lot of good growth going on, but there's a long way to go on the achievement section, that growth should be, that should count for some progress
Right.
in gap closure, even if it might take a few more years before that growth actually shows up substantively on the achievement side. That makes sense. Other thoughts now that I've realized that you all were talking and I just couldn't hear your input during wait time.
I wonder if anyone has anything on their previous question.
Oh, that's a good question. I had a previous question. Now that we've got the sound, boy, this has been, you would think the very last one that we did would be the one with the least amount of issues, but not in this world. Anybody have any input on the long-term goals, or where to start in setting baselines and long-term goals and interim progress, measures of interim progress? So I want to remind everybody that this is an input period, but it's not the last chance. Once all the information's pulled together and things are put into a draft for writing, there's going to be a comment period that will allow you to really reflect on some of the details. And sometimes that's when it's easiest to give input because you're responding to something concrete. And you can just imagine how hard it is for you and how hard it is for all of us to deal with this very nebulous, we're trying to go from language to a reality, and it's not always easy. So hang on, so all these indicators go into a system for annual meaningful differentiation of schools and the identification of schools. And this is the piece that I'm going to run through rather quickly, but I had I don't know if epiphany is the right word, but I spent some time just suspending my old learning from the regulations and looking just at the 4 or 5 pages of ESSA that have all these lovely, when you look at this, these section references that drive you crazy in the law. What I've attempted to do in these next few slides is just put some clarity to that and bring pieces together that are on separate pages of the law that make it hard to understand. So we know we're going to have to annually meaningfully differentiate all schools. We know that at a minimum, we have to identify comprehensive school improvement and school support, comprehensive support and improvement schools. We also know we have to do something with consistently underperforming subgroups. And we also know that it must be based on all indicators. So it can't be based on just a single indicator. And in that identification, really, remember in the last Zoom, I talked about how we were still trying to get some clarity here. It turns out that this idea of the low-performing subgroups, I dug into this, and I gave you the section references here. This is really these are the schools who have a subgroup that is performing at or below the level of performance of the all students group of the schools that get identified as comprehensive support and improvement. Aside from that, this is really, you almost don't even call this an identification. It's really a notification. The department has, under the law, has to notify annually all LEAs, that's districts in their language, all districts, whether they have a consistently underperforming subgroup as defined by the state. And then among those, if any of them fall under a certain performance level compared to the all students group of the bottom 5% on the larger system, those CSI schools, they are required to, it's not a separate designation. It's not a label. There's just an action that follows it. So this was a real eye-opener for me that when you throw away the regulation, we're not thinking about, we need to think a little bit more openly about this, which is what are the actions that districts engage in? So the districts would identify resource inequities if they exist and include in their plan ways to fix that. The biggest thing that we have to identify is a method for consistently underperforming. And that is something that there's an annual notification that the department has to give to districts who have consistently underperforming subgroups. And then they have a plan that gets incorporated into that. It could be part of an existing school improvement plan. There's a lot of ideas that could be generated by thinking about this without the limitations of what we saw in the regulations. And so really we're talking about notifying districts that have schools with consistently underperforming subgroups. If any of those meet the special rule, then they have to just identify resource inequities. And then the other thing is every 3 years when the state has to reevaluate the comprehensive support and improvement designations, that's when, if a school that has had a consistently underperforming subgroup hasn't shown any improvement, they could qualify for chronically underperforming and become a comprehensive support and improvement school. So it's a very different, again, I've just gone through all of this information, but it's a very different feel than what I originally thought it was, because, we're used to get the regs, figure out the regs, those are going to tell us what to do, and then they repealed them. I put in here that special rule. This details for you what they mean here, and it also details that action. So it's really a different way of looking at identifying schools, a little bit more open-ended than perhaps we were thinking. So keep that in mind as you give input in your survey into the process. Then we do have a section in the law for exit criteria. To ensure continued progress, the state has to establish statewide exit criteria. And as I mentioned before, it can't be related to, well, not can't be, but it's not recommended that we relate it to specific targets on the indicators. We need to think a little bit more globally about that. It needs to be related to progress. So again, if you're having ideas here, best thing when you do the survey is to incorporate those ideas and send those back. In that way, let's just have I'm going to go through the prohibitions and I'm going to have you give input. So I found this section. It follows right after comprehensive support and improvement section in the law, and it's called prohibitions. And it says that there is nothing in ESSA that should be construed to authorize the secretary, when they're promulgating rules or regulations, to promulgate any rule or regulation in the development or implementation of statewide accountability systems that would add new requirements that are inconsistent or outside the scope of the law, or add new criteria, or be in excess of the authority granted to the secretary. This is pretty significant. Because one of the biggest frustrations, and I'm sure the department personnel who were part of ESSA flexibility can relate to this, there were some real frustrations with some of the extra requirements under ESSA flexibility that weren't in writing, but the state found out about after submission of its plan that became part of the negotiation process. So what we know from these prohibitions is that kind of game playing is off the table. The other one that I think is really helpful is that the Secretary of Ed is prohibited as a condition of approval of the state plan or any revision or amendment to the state plan or approval of any waiver request submitted under Section 8401. The Secretary can't prescribe what we're going to do in these areas. They can't prescribe that we follow specific numeric long-term goals or measurements. So I see some states who are saying, hey, we think that it's realistic, long-term goal. We want 80% of our students to meet this college and career ready achievement. And we know that in order for all students to be ready for college and career, we're going to focus on more stringent goals, or not more stringent, but 100% of kids achieving some of these other options that are there. So we're seeing a lot of really interesting not quite submissions, but ideas being put forth in draft plans. They can't tell us numeric values. They can't tell us the length of terms for the goals. They can't tell us how to quantify the progress. And they can't tell us what we put down for exit criteria. which was not something we had as much of flexibility with the last time. So what are your thoughts? Given that, when you think about schools that would be identified because they're in the lowest 5% on all of the indicators, right? So it's not just that they're low achieving. It's not just that only 10% of their students achieved ready or exceeding, but it's also that their growth is really low, their graduation rate is really low, et cetera. What exit criteria would motivate schools and their districts to improve their student outcomes and their school outcomes? I would love to hear from you all on this. This is an important piece. So please unmute yourself and share. What would motivate schools to exit? What should we focus on that schools will be focusing on to avoid what Cheryl talked about, the bubble craziness that we had before? What kinds of exit criteria? Would they be more focused on growth? Your thoughts?
Denise,
Yes.
I always think that the growth is key, and I hope this is answering your question. But we have kids that may come to us so far behind, and no, we may not get them to grade level in that year or even in 2 years, but we can always look for them moving towards that goal. And so to me, growth has always been an extremely high motivator for me as a principal, but for I think our teachers too, because you'll hear them say they're not there yet.
Yeah.
And that's that key word, they're not there yet. So if the gap is extremely large, that movement towards that goal, that growth aspect, to me is huge and an extreme motivator for not only the students, but their teachers and administrators.
Yes. Yeah. Great.
But how do we set what acceptable growth is?
Right. And that's where my first thought for that is that we need to think about. So maybe in the transitional accountability system, the 2.5 version, we start with what's available and what we have, but we learn as we go what growth is actually achieving the outcomes in the long run. So it could be that we're looking at, initially the growth model and the Aspire-based growth model, but at the same time that we've all been meeting as an accountability team, we've had an assessment team talking about multiple measures of growth and what those might look like and how we could bring more evidence into this area that seems to be the most important, which is, are students growing even if they're not in this constrained period of time, a single year, achieving the jump over the ready level? Are they demonstrating movement toward those growth goals? So those are, I hope that in the future we're thinking really broadly about additional measures of growth and being able to bring that information together. There are some states that are really far ahead of us in using other kinds of measures of growth, but they've been working on it. They've been doing the work to do that. And not every district is ready to go there, but maybe we have some districts who are interested in looking at that and maybe piloting something like that as we transition toward the future accountability system that really is far removed from the crazy mindsets we got into with No Child Left Behind. So other thoughts about this exit criteria. So focusing on that growth, that progress, that movement toward a student's goal in some way that gets recognized in the exit criteria in a larger measure. I put in here, I think I took it out. The last time I had the slide in the last Zoom, I said, one of the things that I've heard a lot from people is, people should get out the way that they get in. And I actually saw a state that does that. They're proposing a couple of different ways it's not different ways. It's 3 conditions. One condition was they can exit if they stay out of the bottom 5% for 2 years in a row. And they also have to demonstrate gap closure on consistently underperforming subgroups. And there was one other criteria that I can't remember. I'll have to go look that up. But I've been out looking at ideas. I'm just curious your thoughts about that one, because I have heard from federal programs coordinators, we should get out the way we get in, which is basically just to stay out of the bottom. Is that really is that a motivator? Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
That would not be motivating to me at all, just to stay out of the bottom.
Well, that's
Because that's my goal every year is to that means you're not doing what you need to do for your kids.
yeah.
Staying out of the bottom 5% would not be a motivator to me.
Well, and especially under multiple indicators, right? I mean, multiple indicators that take into consideration the kids walking through our doors. Staying out of the bottom just seems like not shooting for much.
I think that's what I thought of is that's aiming low.
Yeah.
You're always going to be aiming higher than that. I don't want to aim for you're not even talking about aiming for mediocre there.
Right. So, what I hear is it's important to have some aspirational goals that are realistic but aspirational. And then we also need ways to give credit for movement toward that goal, growth, and other ways of looking at multiple measures of growth. They might be in a variety of different ways. Anything else before we move to the next piece?
Denise, this is more of just a side note. This is Ashley Daniel. One of the things that when we were looking at individual student growth, just because we have schools with very different demographics within our own district, that we found to be very interesting was just sharing with schools that were struggling with, say, moving the top kids. Yeah. Sharing with those schools some of the ways that a school that's at 95% proficient or ready is moving and growing kids at that upper level. So just showing them that evidence that it is possible, you can move and grow those kids. So that's just more of as in that process when they're in the trenches working with those schools of sharing those best practices.
Ashley, that brings up a really good point, which is, that's one way that the state system can support schools, which is to make sure that, equitably, that's one of the reasons why I think we'll always have a test-based growth measure, if for nothing else, in places where they're not ready to include a bunch of additional measures. They need to be able to rely on, we're going to have some good growth information. Here are great ways that you can use it. Here are the conversations you can have about it. So you raise a really good point, which is part of that larger support piece, which is, what this is supposed to be about. It's a support and accountability system, not just a gotcha. That's a really good point. Other thoughts?
This is Cheryl. I just wanted to put out there, I work in a district that's probably been on school improvement since school improvement started. So if we're at year 14, they've been on it all 14 years. And one of the criteria for them on getting better would just be teacher retainment, because every single year it's a new faculty. And so I think that one of the things that might be beneficial for us is that consistency of getting the message out to even those brand new teachers and brand new administrators in those schools, that they get it early. A lot of times we wouldn't see the school improvement people come until October or November of the school year. And so it becomes a little bit difficult for the new people to get on board and even understand the language of what's going on to try to meet the criteria. So I just wanted to put that out there.
No, you make a great point. And one of the big shifts that we're seeing in the conceptualizing of accountability, support and accountability under ESSA is, how does the state support districts in supporting their schools? So what information does the district need to be mindful of these different things? So what is in the, what information can the state pull together and make available to districts to help them understand and support any struggling schools within their district? And that's not how we've thought about it in prior years, but it's kind of a way to really put, what it does is it puts the control where the control really exists, and it doesn't jump over the district level. It says, hey, you're a decision-making body, and you've got schools within this district that are struggling, and here's some information, here's some guidance on how you can work with them to improve this. Because sometimes if you're in a big district, sometimes some of that teacher retention has nothing to do with what the building level person does. It has to do with district policy about movement. And that, you know, a school can't solve that on their own. A school needs a district to be looking out for them and being mindful of that. So that's a good point. Other thoughts before we move into the next set of topics? All right, well, you are going to have a chance. If you have a thought that pops in the minute you get off, I'm going to share the link. It's actually in the folder for the survey. And what I've done in the survey is ask it's very brief. I think there's 12 questions, but the questions are much less complex than the last time. And you should be able to move through it in around 10, 12 minutes. But it'll only take longer if you decide, I'm going to input all of this extra, and that's great. We want your input. So we gave you the option to decide how much information you want to add into the survey. I put in a lot of entry blocks, text entries for you. Let's talk a little bit. This is one of the questions that's going to be on the survey, and this is one that's probably near and dear to most people with a stat background. The data procedures. There are no requirements in the statute around data procedures. There were in the regulation. But as you know, in prior years, data have been combined. So in order to have a critical mass from which you can make decisions, data are combined across grades. And then data have also been combined across years. And part of that is because it increases the amount of information that's available to consider in the accountability system, which increases the reliability of the accountability determinations. It also increases the number of subgroups that might meet the minimum N, which, depending on how you look at it, increases equity among schools of different sizes. So the big districts are always going to are mostly going to have schools that meet more subgroup minimum ends. So by increasing the number of years or lowering the minimum end size, you can kind of level that playing field, but you also increase reliability. So the question is, if we were to do some kind of index, which seems to have been a combination of index and matrix, or index and other multiple measures, how many years of data would you want to have considered in that annual meaningful differentiation system? So how many years would you want? If you think about the it's only 2 years old, 2015 A through F, that only included a year of data. But under the old federal systems, we actually used the most current year or the best case scenario of either their most current data or multiple years of data. So I'm just curious about your thoughts here. Current year plus one. What are your thoughts here? 3 years?
Hey, Denise,
Yes.
would we still use 3 years for the extremely small schools?
We will have to come up with rules for how to keep extremely small schools in. So if you're out there and you're in an extremely small system, there are going to have to be rules that bring in extremely small schools. I'm just curious, if you're not an extremely small school, what are the preferences there? Because this is what 99% of the schools that are out there. We really have very few that are so small that you have to use 3 years of data for their all students group. What are people thinking out there?
Denise, this is Regina. So clarification on the fourth bullet, best case of current year or multiple years. So that would be like one of the ones above where we're either looking at current year or current year plus other years and the best of those.
Yeah.
Like we've done in the past. How that?
Yes, similar to what was done in the past. This is a programming nightmare, but so I just throw it out there because it's been done in the past. Sometimes that current year can be very volatile if you choose not to use multiple years of data. Even in a school that has 25 or 10 or 15, whatever the number ends up being, the more information, the more reliable. Of course, we sometimes have schools that just have a crazy year. Maybe I'm only serving a grade level. Like we're seeing this freshman academy thing, systems that are setting up like a separate school for just 9th grade. And that may really serve those 9th grade students well, but we also don't want to punish them if the data are just that one group of kids. I mean, think about it. If we've all been educators, we know that you have variability in the groups of kids at a grade level. So I'm thinking in terms of if you're smaller or if you only serve a grade level, if you're dealing with substantively different students each year, you might have more variability. And so that's where having a best case scenario might be helpful. So yes, it would be, give me the better score of what I did this year or what I did if I put together 2 years or 3 years. And interestingly, U.S. Department of Ed under regs were recommending 2 years. They were feeling like 3 years kind of locked in too much of a trend.
On the number 4 bullet, Denise, would that be like it was before, either all or none? Either we're going to use all of 3 year or we're going to use all of first year?
That's like down the line.
Oh, okay.
That's called, how do we operationalize this? But yeah, I mean, right, some of those things might play out. I think it might be a little different if we're using an index, because there's more information going into it, Kelly, than what would have been going into the way we used it before. Are you writing that program already?
No, ma'am.
Any other thoughts before I move to report card redesign? All right. Well, Lewis, are you sitting up straight? So the recent release of My School Info kind of provides some unique access to a wealth of information. If you haven't gone into My School Info to see all the statewide information system data that are available there, there is so much that you could dig into to get deeper and deeper into understanding what's going on in schools. And it allows you to filter and sort so that you can find similar schools, or you can find schools within a range of certain characteristics. So you can basically set filters that narrow down the list of schools, and you can compare performance on one thing versus another. So this could serve a really neat back end to an annual report card. I want to throw that out because I want you all to be thinking about that. Any initial thoughts as I say that? All right. Then what I have for you here is kind of a little set. Think in terms of tiered levels of indicators. Not everything needs to go on the state report card. We learned about a state that is actually doing a state set of indicators. Some are in the accountability system. Some are just reported. Some are then at the district level, they have some system that allows districts to upload reporting on local indicators that they want to include on that state report, which I thought was kind of cool. I don't know where that's like, maybe that's something down the line that we could work towards. But think in terms of not everything has to be in the accountability system. Sometimes just reporting it in an informative way can make a really big difference. And I'm going to now show you some examples. Lewis sent these to me. He's been really focused on updating what we've got going. This is an example of a state summary page this is a less busy version of a multiple measures dashboard, if you will. And the idea here is that we want to report in such a way that it's transparent and it's effective communication. So you see the theme-based displays of the state summary data. And the way that this particular system is being designed, this is Ohio, this is a different state than the one that's doing the upload of the local along with the state. These are all drillable on the online system, but then they also can be produced in this lovely color PDF if you'd like to print it in this lovely color PDF. So imagine this as a drillable report. When you drill into it, you're going to get deeper information about each of these indicators on the summary page. If you go to print it, you're going to get 27 pages of visuals. But what I like about that is you can get all the information in print for whatever documentation you want. But then if you are just looking to get certain information, if you're a stakeholder that's wanting to know how growth is looking or what are the things that go into school district performance, you can drill down to those levels. So let's take a look at another level. So this would be looking at the different components of a particular school. In this case, they say district, but we don't plan to have, at least I don't think we're required to have district level ratings, either state or federally. It's more school, and the district is set up to support the schools. Here they show that their indicators are going to be, and notice it says coming in 2016. They don't have all of theirs done yet either. They're still making decisions. So achievement, gap closing, they have a K-3 literacy indicator. I'll show you some details in a minute. Progress, graduation rate, and prepared for success. So they break it into these 6 areas. And then notice too that they're still coming to terms with or trying to make decisions around their overall rating and then the index component ratings. So you may or may not give a grade for the components, but you could give whatever points were earned out of points possible. Just depends on how you want to put it together. This is an example of digging deeper into the achievement. So how they got their score in their index may have come from the different levels that students are. So it looks like they have a weighted index, kind of like what we've used in the past on our A through F rating. And you can see the little, I love the little gauges because they kind of tell you where they are on that index and whether or not they're getting kids at that higher level of learning. It also splits it out in a pie chart. And then to the right, you get a bar chart that gives you the information in a different way. So these are also drillable. These also allow you to dig in on when the site launches for them. Then if you go into achievement, you can also go in and get achievement by grade level. So you can go from the broad school level, where it's all pulled together for the accountability in differentiation, but the system itself lets you dig more deeply into looking at, so maybe there are grade level differences. And that's sometimes really helpful. I mean, I've definitely worked with schools where they're knocking their socks off at one grade level, and then for some reason the next grade level just looks really not quite so vigorous. And that's a conversation. That's a support and improvement conversation at the building level. What can we do to support what's going on here to get a similar picture for this grade level? So again, here, this is a way that they're reporting against targets, right? Not necessarily part of the index, but they're reporting against the target. So it's very transparent and it aids in interpretation. Again, this is subgroup detail. I thought that this was kind of interesting. I don't know about grading all the different subgroups. That might be whatever, but I think you could definitely give a color coding in terms of how the subgroups are doing. You might even present how they're doing they're doing it by a grade, but you could actually have a matrix that shows how they're doing in terms of growth and proficiency. Digging deeper, this is again, they're reporting against the annual measurable objective or that interim progress measure. And It looks like they've got some long-term goals in here too. But you'll have a chance to kind of review this. You can download the PowerPoint. It's been uploaded to the folder. And one of the things I admire about this is that they weren't afraid to say that some things are going to be coming soon. Like, we have this vision and we're not ready for the whole vision to come together, but we're working towards it. And I think that shows that they're working towards it. And it helps to show that they've got this deeper system that's going to provide the information, or some of the state-supported information for the work that goes on at the school level. And then, of course, districts are going to have their own data that's part of their local cycle of improvement and inquiry. I do have a thing for gauges, if you haven't noticed, but this was a neat way to show graduation rate relative to progress in terms of the long-term goals. And then finally, this was the K-3 literacy example. I thought this was interesting. One of the questions on the survey is about what to do with new schools and feeder schools and the requirement that we have to do all schools. So I don't have a slide about that because I had a slide about that in the last, but I included a question. I thought this was kind of interesting. They use some kindergarten data, some first grade data, second grade data, and third grade data. They focus on literacy in particular in this instance. So I thought that was an interesting thing for them. So before I go to the next slide, thoughts about what you're seeing. Does this resonate? We're not, wait a minute, I got one more. Oops. So this is like the most butchered chance to look at real Arkansas data relative to a matrix of growth and performance. So the percent of students, every single one of those blue dots represents a school in the state of Arkansas, and their percentage of students that were ready or exceeding on the state required assessments, and then their value-added growth score, but we transformed it so that an 80 is expected growth. And this was just my very rough attempt to try and give a sense of where you might draw some lines about the intersection of growth and performance, and I color-coded it. So if you're in the blue, you'd be in a really great space. If you're in the green, you're in a good space. You're most likely doing a lot of really great things. And if you're in the yellow, you're making progress towards the green. If you're in the orange, you might want to watch out. And then if you're in the red, you really need to take a close look. And you can see it's not a large number of schools down there in the red. So with that, thoughts about this? Does this resonate? Or anything in particular that resonates before we finish up our Zoom for today? That means you guys are ready to finish up and move on to the survey a bit. Let me tell you about what happens next. So the knowledge of the work, your opinions about how to execute the work, your vetting of this input, and your identification of these foreseeable risks. This input is going to become part of a larger body of work that is resulting from these consolidated that has been part of the advisory team works that will go into and result in the consolidated plan. All of your input and recommendations, what we've shared during this time and how you've responded anonymously on the surveys, will be part of summaries that are put together and analyzed, and then those summaries will be presented to the ESSA steering committee to begin their work on their March 29th work session. And then they'll use your summaries to further identify what are some of the risks and issues, what's some more input, let's vet some of the input, and really look from their diverse perspectives, because the ESSA steering committee is a broader set of stakeholders, parents, community members, students, all kinds of people. And then finally, once we come to a point where we think we've got information to move forward from their work session, then all of that will be synthesized into the input for the plan, right? So that's your efforts for meaningful consultation that will be part of the final synthesis. that plan, when it gets put out, it's going to have a public comment period. You're not done if you don't want to be done. If you want to be able to react to that concrete, you'll have an opportunity to react to the concrete plan itself. So that'll be a pretty neat thing. And then the last thing I have for you is the survey link. I will send this out in an email to everybody. I encourage you to send it to whoever you can. It will close Friday afternoon at close of business. We have to turn everything around really quickly for March 29th. We have to pull it all together and have some cool visuals and all that fun stuff. So it's shorter, but the timeline for completing it is much shorter. So my hope is you'll take a few minutes when you get off the line and you'll just do it really quickly while it's fresh in your mind. And then pass it on to your friends and others that you know who are critical input providers for this process. And with that, I guess I'll just ask if there are any last questions or comments. Well, then I'll just thank you guys. 5 total hours, maybe a little bit more last week, of your dedication to be here and to provide information back, to be willing to think deeply about these topics. And I hope that, as I said, this is not your last time to give input, that you will listen to or you can even attend the ESSA Steering Committee work session, and then also reflect back in public comment on the first draft that comes out. Really, really appreciate you all and the time that you've dedicated to this. And don't forget to do the survey. The link is already in the share folder, but I will send it out to you once we get offline. So thank you so much. Look forward to hearing from you all in the future on all of this.